The day the Galactic Council declared war on Earth, everything changed. It wasn't a typical announcement. It wasn't expected. No one on Earth had ever imagined that a group of alien species spread across countless star systems would focus their attention on them. But it happened. It all began in the vast halls of the Galactic Council, where the leaders of powerful alien races gathered. For centuries, Earth had been known as a backwater planet, filled with barely evolved creatures. Humanity, according to the Council, had always been a weak species, too insignificant to challenge the galaxy's most powerful empires. Humans had their wars, their nations, their cities, but no one saw them as a serious threat. No one except the Council. The Council had decided that Earth had to be brought under control. They didn't just want to conquer the planet. They wanted to silence it, erase the challenge that humanity posed. For reasons no one on Earth could understand, they had declared war. On Earth, life continued as normal. People went to work, children played in the streets, and businesses thrived. They were unaware of what was happening in the galaxy above. They had no idea that an empire with the power to destroy entire civilizations was focused on them. The news came as a shock. The first announcement from the Galactic Council echoed through the screens worldwide. News channels went silent for a moment, and then the message began. This is the Galactic Council speaking. We, the united forces of the most advanced races in the galaxy, declare war on Earth. The human species has proven itself too unpredictable, too dangerous. This is not a negotiation. Earth's fate is sealed. The broadcast was short. The tone was cold, distant, and without mercy. It was clear that the Council had made its decision, and it wouldn't back down. The galaxy's most powerful races had united for one purpose: to ensure that humanity would never pose a threat again. Back on Earth, chaos didn't immediately break out. There was no mass panic, no widespread fear. Instead, something strange happened. People simply stared at their screens in confusion, trying to process the words. Then came the shock. A brief silence filled every home, office, and street. Earth had been declared an enemy of the galaxy, but there was something odd in the air. A sense of disbelief, followed by a strange calm. The humans didn't panic. No one started screaming, and there were no immediate riots. This was not how people were expected to respond to a war declaration from the Galactic Council. There was no fear, no sense of dread. Why? It was a question that the alien leaders had never thought to ask. They believed humanity was weak, and yet Earth's response seemed to say something else. On the surface, the leaders of Earth seemed calm, but behind closed doors, their actions were anything but. The moment the Council's message was broadcasted, Earth's top military officers, scientists, and government officials came together. They didn't panic either. They were calm, but they were also preparing. General Robert Kane, the commander of Earth's global defense forces, stared at the screen with his hands folded behind his back. "They think we're weak," he said quietly. "They think we're scared. We'll show them they're wrong." Kane's words were simple, but they carried weight. Earth was not a defenseless planet. Humanity may not have had the size or advanced technology of the Galactic Council's vast fleets, but humans had something else: resilience, ingenuity, and a deep-rooted will to survive. The Council was about to learn that the hard way. Around the world, different countries had their own reactions, but they all had the same core belief: they would fight. They would not go down quietly. The declaration of war was met with a surge of patriotism and a sense of unity. The nations, divided by many things, were suddenly united by one cause: to defend their home. But the question remained: how would they defend against an enemy with the power to annihilate entire planets? General Kane knew that Earth could not compete with the Council in terms of sheer firepower. Their fleets were immense, their weapons devastating, and their technology light years ahead. But there was something about humanity that set them apart from the alien invaders. Humanity was unpredictable. Earth's leaders turned their attention to the most important asset they had, their creativity. Humanity was a species that had survived against all odds. They had invented weapons, built cities, and traveled to the stars. They were resilient, but most importantly, they had something the Galactic Council had not accounted for, an ability to think outside the box. They would use their minds to survive, and that would be their strength. Kane turned to his team. We can't just sit here and wait for them to come. We need to be ready. The military began mobilizing immediately, but not in the traditional sense. Instead of preparing for conventional warfare, they began work on something entirely new, something the Galactic Council would never expect. Humanity was about to show the Council just how wrong they were about Earth's potential. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council's command center, there was growing frustration. The initial reports from their scouts showed that Earth had not responded with fear or panic. The Council had expected humans to cower in fear, perhaps even surrendering before the first shot was fired. But instead, they were seeing something entirely different. Humans were beginning to organize. We underestimated them, muttered Sarn, the leader of the Huesar, a race known for their brutal efficiency in warfare. They're not scared. They're planning something. The Council leaders convened in a war room, where holographic maps of Earth and its military forces appeared. They were confident that the war would be quick, but now there was a hint of doubt. Was Earth truly as weak as they had believed? Were these humans hiding something more dangerous? Farn's voice echoed in the Council chamber. We need to act quickly. If Earth is mobilizing, it will only make them more dangerous. We cannot let them prepare any longer. But what the Galactic Council didn't know was that Earth wasn't just preparing for war. They were preparing for the unexpected, ready to use every last ounce of their creativity and innovation to fight back against an enemy that had underestimated them. They had been written off as weak, but that was about to change. The war wasn't just about strength, it was about survival, and humanity was willing to do whatever it took to protect their planet. As the Galactic Council prepared for their next move, one thing was clear: Earth was no longer the easy target they had imagined. This was only the beginning. The Galactic Council's declaration was supposed to shatter humanity's resolve. It was meant to force Earth into submission, to scare the human race into retreating to its primitive roots. But the silence that followed the announcement was deafening. On Earth, the first few hours were filled with uncertainty. Leaders gathered behind closed doors, whispering plans, debating options, and trying to understand what had just happened. The average citizen, meanwhile, was confused but not afraid. The news spread across the world, but instead of panic, there was an eerie calm. In every corner of Earth, people were processing the news differently. Some felt fear, but more felt something else: anger. The message was clear. The Council thought humanity was weak, thought they could simply walk in and take over. But instead of cowering, something deep inside humans began to stir. It was their natural drive to resist, to fight for survival. On a global scale, the response was swift and organized. Within hours, nations began to communicate. The world was divided in many ways: politically, culturally, and economically. But there was one thing that all humans shared in that moment: Earth. The home they had fought for and built upon, the place they called their own. It was time to act. The world's leaders decided that Earth would not surrender. Instead of seeking advice from their most advanced allies or relying on their existing weaponry, they turned inward to their own ingenuity. The Council had expected Earth to beg for peace, but what they didn't realize was that humanity had something far more dangerous than weapons. They had creativity. One man, Dr. Andrew Miller, a scientist who had worked on secret space programs for years, was already thinking ahead. He had watched the Council's message with growing concern, but he knew something the rest of the world didn't. For years, humans had been developing technology that could give them an edge, while the Council believed humanity was still trapped on their planet, oblivious to the greater universe. Earth had been building something that could change everything. "We can't win with just the tools we have now," Dr. Miller muttered to himself as he paced back and forth in his lab. "But if we combine our existing resources with what we've secretly been working on." His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish the thought. He knew that if the Council underestimated humanity, it would be their greatest mistake. Back at the Pentagon, General Kane was busy strategizing with his team of military experts. They didn't have the ships, the fleets, or the advanced weapons that the Galactic Council commanded, but they had something just as powerful. They had a world united behind them, and they had an extraordinary ability to think outside the box. Kane's team had started to develop a plan. They didn't need to beat the Galactic Council at their own game. They didn't need to match their technology one for one. What they needed was to surprise them, use their own strategies and expectations against them. A fleet of ships would be outclassed in terms of sheer power, but it could be used as a distraction. The real weapon would be something else entirely. "We'll give them a show," Kane said, a sly grin forming on his face. "But we won't do it with conventional tactics. They'll never see it coming." As the hours passed, it became clear that Earth wasn't just making plans to survive. They were crafting an entirely new strategy for war, one that the Galactic Council would never anticipate. The world's brightest minds were working together in secret, combining their knowledge to create something more powerful than anyone could have predicted. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council watched Earth closely. Their spies had reported back that humans were preparing for something. The Council's leaders were puzzled. They couldn't understand why Earth wasn't surrendering, why they weren't panicking. They had expected the human race to fold under the weight of the announcement, but instead, they were seeing something else: defiance. "What is Earth doing?" Sarn, the YSAR leader, asked, his voice full of frustration. "They are organizing," reported one of the Council's generals. "But we don't know what they're planning. They're not retreating. They're preparing." The Council's leaders exchanged nervous glances. They had expected the humans to be weak, but now they were uncertain. Humanity wasn't acting like a species about to be defeated. They were acting like a species preparing for something big. On Earth, as the global defense teams worked overtime to build new technologies, something else began to happen. The people of Earth started to unite in ways never seen before. Nations began to share intelligence, ideas, and resources. This wasn't just a defense effort anymore. It was a call to arms, a call to defend their world, their people, their way of life. The world had been shaken by the Council's declaration of war, but it was also waking up. Humans had always prided themselves on their adaptability. Now that adaptability would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. The news of Earth's preparations spread quickly. The Galactic Council's spies could only watch as Earth's military began to organize, coordinate, and build. They could see the strength of humanity's spirit, but they couldn't understand it. They didn't know how to react. Every move they made was being watched, every decision countered. And then something strange happened. Earth's leaders, in their final attempt to send a message to the Council, released their own broadcast. It was a simple message, but one that would change everything. "We are not afraid. You will regret this. Earth will never fall." It wasn't an army, a fleet, or a weapon. It was the will of the people. And it would prove to be more powerful than anything the Galactic Council had ever imagined. But would it be enough? This was just the beginning. The Galactic Council was preparing for a full-scale invasion. But Earth had something up its sleeve that no one, not even the Council, could predict. And it was about to make itself known. As Earth braced itself for the inevitable war, a quiet revolution was taking place in the depths of humanity's most advanced facilities. Across the world, various teams of scientists, engineers, and military experts were working tirelessly to create a weapon that could turn the tide of the war before it even began. But this weapon wasn't like anything the Galactic Council had ever seen before. It wasn't a fleet of ships, a swarm of drones, or an army of enhanced soldiers. It was something far more unexpected, something that would catch the Council off guard and shatter their belief that humanity was nothing more than a primitive species. Dr. Andrew Miller, the scientist who had foreseen this moment, was deep in thought as he stared at the schematics on his computer screen. His hands hovered over the keyboard, adjusting calculations, ensuring every detail was perfect. He knew that the Council's biggest mistake was underestimating the human spirit, and more importantly, the ingenuity that came with it. The Galactic Council believed that Earth was behind in every way possible, but they didn't understand how far humanity had come in secret. "Are we ready?" a voice behind him asked. It was Sarah Lee, one of his top engineers, and the key to bringing his vision to life. She had been working on the secret project for months, and her hands were as steady as ever, even under pressure. "We're close," Dr. Miller replied. "But it needs to be flawless. We only get one shot at this." The "this" they were talking about wasn't just a new weapon. It was humanity's first true megastructure, a project so vast and intricate that it had been kept under wraps for years. The Galactic Council had no idea it existed, and even the highest officials on Earth were unaware of its true potential. It had been built in secret, hidden away from prying eyes and false hope. The weapon, if successful, would change the course of the war before a single shot was fired. But it was more than just a weapon. It was a statement. A declaration that humanity wouldn't be cowed, wouldn't surrender, and certainly wouldn't be defeated by an alien council that thought they were untouchable. Meanwhile, across the world, preparations for war continued. Armies trained, fleets assembled, and entire cities were fortified. Yet, as the days passed, something remarkable began to happen. Earth's military and civilian leaders, instead of working against each other, began working in perfect unison. Former enemies on Earth, now united under the threat of invasion, shared resources and information like never before. The atmosphere on Earth was charged with determination. People felt the urgency in the air, but it wasn't panic or fear. It was the overwhelming desire to fight back. The Galactic Council's declaration had awakened a fire inside the people of Earth, one that would not easily be extinguished. In orbit, Earth's communications satellites transmitted images and messages back and forth, setting the stage for what would soon be the biggest showdown the galaxy had ever seen. The Galactic Council, still puzzled by Earth's silence, continued to prepare for their invasion, unaware that their greatest adversary wasn't a fleet of ships. It was the very essence of humanity. Dr. Miller's project had been in the works for years, and it was finally ready. The secret weapon was not something the Council could destroy with bombs or missiles, because it wasn't a traditional weapon. No, it was something far more insidious. It was a network, a vast, global system that would allow humanity to control the very fabric of space itself. The weapon was a massive, multi-dimensional device designed to manipulate gravitational forces on a planetary scale. Using advanced quantum mechanics and a deep understanding of cosmic forces, Earth had managed to develop technology that could bend the laws of physics. This technology, when activated, could turn any invading fleet into a powerless fleet of floating debris. No shields, no weapons, no advanced technologies would save them from the grip of gravity itself. Yet, as powerful as the weapon was, it needed the perfect moment to be activated. And so, Earth's leaders continued to prepare for an invasion that was yet to come, all the while keeping the existence of the secret weapon a closely guarded secret. As the Council prepared their forces for the final stages of the war, they remained confident. They believed they had won the battle before it had even started. After all, how could a planet of humans, primitive and behind in every way, possibly fight back against an empire so vast? And then, on the eve of the Galactic Council's first strike, Dr. Miller's team stood in the control room, staring at the massive device that had been carefully constructed beneath the Earth's surface. The countdown had begun, and soon, everything would change. But not for the first time. Dr. Miller found himself staring at the device with a deep sense of awe. The weapon would either destroy the Council's fleet or force them to retreat, but it also carried a heavy risk. If something went wrong, Earth could suffer too. But there was no turning back. They had come too far. "Are we sure about this?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice full of concern. "We have no other choice," Dr. Miller answered. "If we want to survive, we must show them that we are not to be underestimated." As the countdown neared its final seconds, Dr. Miller's thoughts raced. This was it, the moment that could save humanity or doom them all. The Galactic Council had no idea what was coming. The Galactic Council's fleet was nearly in position. Thousands of ships, their dark silhouettes casting shadows against the stars, moved into formation above Earth, ready to deliver the first blow. The Council had made sure their forces were overwhelming. No matter how powerful humanity's resistance might be, they were certain their ships would decimate any defense that Earth could muster. On Earth, the tension was palpable. Military leaders met in war rooms, strategizing how best to counter the incoming assault. The leaders of the world had set aside their differences, now united by one common goal: survival. Everyone, from the highest generals to the common citizen, prepared for the fight of their lives. But no one, not even the most seasoned military minds, could predict what would happen next. Dr. Andrew Miller, along with his team, stood by the control console, watching the countdown clock tick away in agonizing silence. The gravity manipulation system was ready, its energy reserves fully charged, awaiting the signal to activate. The weapon had been designed to be the ultimate deterrent, a measure of last resort that would shift the balance of power in an instant. The Galactic Council had no idea that humanity had unlocked the ability to control space itself. "Are you ready?" Sarah Lee's voice was steady, but even she couldn't hide the hint of nervousness in her words. The tension in the air was suffocating, and the magnitude of their mission weighed heavily on everyone present. "As ready as we'll ever be," Dr. Miller replied, though his words were laced with uncertainty. "Once we activate this, there's no going back." Outside the room, Earth's military forces were poised, awaiting the signal. Fighter jets soared through the skies, ships readied their weapons, and the defense systems were on full alert. But all of this was a distraction, a feint. The real power lay beneath the Earth's surface, hidden from the enemy, and from most of humanity itself. The Galactic Fleet, meanwhile, continued its advance, unchallenged in their path. Their sensors had detected nothing unusual. The planetary defenses appeared primitive and weak. The Council's leaders, secure in their belief of victory, prepared to make their move. All they needed was a few more minutes before the first wave of missiles would rain down on Earth, and then they would initiate the invasion in full force. As the fleet neared, the sensors on Earth's side began to pick up strange fluctuations in space, a ripple in gravitational forces. It was subtle at first, hardly noticeable by most. But then, the tremors began to grow stronger. Something was wrong. The ships in orbit felt it first, a tugging force, something pulling at the very fabric of space. The Council's fleet commander, Admiral Rask, scowled as his flagship suddenly shook. It was as if the entire fleet was being caught in an invisible web, one that was tightening around them. His eyes darted to the data on his screen, but everything appeared normal. Still, the feeling was unmistakable. Something had changed. "What's happening?" Admiral Rask demanded. He turned to his engineers, who were frantically scanning for any signs of malfunctions. "We're being pulled, sir," a technician reported. "It's not gravitational. It's something artificial, something unknown." But before they could investigate further, the space around them seemed to warp. The stars themselves bent, as if they were being twisted by an unseen force. The fleet, once so confident, found itself in the grip of something far more powerful than any weapon they had ever encountered. Back on Earth, Dr. Miller and his team exchanged tense glances. The device was working. The gravitational manipulation system had been activated, and the gravitational waves were now expanding outward, pulling the entire fleet toward Earth. "What have we done?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. The weapon was already in motion, and there was no way to reverse it. As the fleet was pulled closer, Admiral Rask watched in horror as his ships began to lose control. The Council had been so sure of their victory, but now they were trapped in a field of distorted spacetime. One by one, the ships faltered, their engines struggling against the unnatural forces at play. "Prepare to engage the emergency thrusters," Admiral Rask shouted, trying to regain control. But the damage was done. The ships couldn't escape the pull of Earth's gravity manipulation. The fleet was being sucked into an invisible vortex, unable to fight against the force that Earth had just unleashed. On Earth's surface, military leaders watched as the skies above them grew darker. The distant stars were now visible, flickering as though they were being distorted by an unknown power. The communications channels buzzed with reports of strange anomalies in space. But then, a report came in that sent shockwaves through the command centers. The fleet was retreating. The first wave of Council ships, once so confident in their superiority, was now struggling to break free of the gravitational field Earth had created. The fleet's enormous warships were being dragged through space, some even colliding with one another as they attempted to break free of the pull. It was a perfect moment of chaos. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity in the worst possible way. Their pride, their overconfidence, had led them to this moment. The fight, it seemed, had already been decided. But Dr. Miller knew that this was only the beginning. The gravitational wave wasn't just a one-time shockwave. It was a signal, and it was only a matter of time before the Council realized that Earth had something far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. As the last of the enemy ships fought to free themselves, the weapon's energy reserves began to fade. The countdown was nearly complete. Earth had shown the galaxy that they were no longer the weak, helpless species the Council had believed them to be. But there was still more to come. More surprises, more weapons that the Council could never foresee. The battle for Earth had only just begun. Earth's time was running out. With the gravitational field destabilizing, and the galactic fleet regaining its strength, the planet stood at a precipice. Humanity's last hope now lay in a desperate gamble, a strike that could either turn the tide in their favor or doom them to destruction. Dr. Miller and Sarah stood in the control room, watching the chaos unfold. The lights flickered again as the energy reserves continued to dwindle. The gravitational system was malfunctioning, its once precise control over space now spiraling out of control. Yet there was no time to fix it. The battle was reaching its peak. "The fleet is regrouping," Sarah said, her voice strained. "If we don't act now, Earth won't survive the next wave." Dr. Miller's hands moved swiftly over the console, his mind racing with calculations. "We've got one shot," he muttered. "Just one. We need to concentrate all the power into a single blast. If we don't, the gravitational field will collapse before we can do anything." Outside, the first wave of the galactic fleet had recovered from the effects of the gravitational weapon. The enemy ships, battered but far from defeated, were now forming into a tight formation, preparing for their final assault on Earth. They had already demonstrated their terrifying power, and now they were coming in full force. Admiral Rask watched as the last of his ships managed to escape the gravitational field. His expression was one of cold determination. "We've taken too long. It's time to finish this. Full speed ahead. Prepare for planetary bombardment." Rask's orders were clear, and his fleet responded immediately. The ships began moving toward Earth, weapons charging for the impending strike. It was only a matter of time before the Council's full might descended upon the planet. Back in the control room, the tension was unbearable. The gravitational system's malfunction was growing worse by the second. Dr. Miller knew that the weapon, which had once been Earth's greatest asset, was now a ticking time bomb. He needed to make a decision fast. "We need to overload the system," Dr. Miller said, his voice urgent. "It's the only way to break their fleet and buy us time." "But we won't be able to control it," Sarah warned. "The weapon could go critical." "We don't have a choice." Dr. Miller snapped, his eyes locked on the screens. If we don't act, they'll destroy everything. This is our last chance. Reluctantly, Sarah nodded. Do it. Dr. Miller typed in the final sequence, his fingers moving in a blur. The control room hummed with energy as the gravitational system powered up. It was a gamble. Overloading the system could break the enemy fleet, but it could also destroy Earth's atmosphere, creating a chain reaction that would tear the planet apart. There was no turning back now. Just as the overload began, an unexpected power surge rippled through the facility, causing the lights to blink out. For a moment, everything went dark. Then the room was flooded with a bright, blinding light as the gravitational system reached its breaking point. Outside, the Galactic fleet was closing in on Earth. The enemy ships lined up, their weapons primed and ready to fire. They had no idea what was coming. In that moment, Earth unleashed the full fury of its secret weapon. A shockwave of gravitational force surged outward, like a cosmic pulse that shook the very fabric of space itself. The first wave of the Galactic fleet was caught in its devastating grip. The ships were torn apart, their hulls buckling under the immense pressure as the gravitational field ripped through their structures. Admiral Rask's flagship was the first to feel the effects. The massive vessel groaned as it was sucked into the field, its engines struggling to maintain control. He slammed his fist against the console in frustration. No, not like this. The dust from the battle had hardly settled when the enormity of the consequences became clear. Earth had survived, but the planet was wounded. The gravitational pulse that had shattered the Galactic fleet had caused untold destruction. Massive earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions had reshaped the surface, and the skies above Earth had turned an eerie blood-red hue. The planet was in chaos. In the control room, Dr. Miller and Sarah stood, staring at the monitors. The damage to Earth was staggering. Cities had been wiped out, and entire regions were rendered uninhabitable. The gravitational shockwave had affected the planet's core, destabilizing the atmosphere and creating dangerous levels of radiation. Humanity had emerged victorious in their battle with the Galactic Council, but the cost of their victory was high. We did it, but at what price? Sarah whispered, her voice hollow as she gazed at the chaotic landscape displayed on the screens. Dr. Miller's face was grim. He had never imagined the aftermath would be this severe. We've won, but Earth, it's broken. The weapon worked, too well, perhaps. It wasn't supposed to cause this much damage. We'll need to find a way to stabilize the planet before it's too late. Outside, the world was falling apart. Cities that had once been thriving metropolises were now reduced to rubble. Earthquakes continued to shake the planet, and massive tidal waves crashed along coastlines, swallowing everything in their path. The atmosphere, once thick with clouds, was now choked with dust and ash. But despite the devastation, there was a glimmer of hope. The Galactic Council's fleet had been destroyed, leaving no enemy forces to contend with. The invaders had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now the Council's arrogance had cost them everything. Across the world, survivors began to regroup. Governments that had once been in turmoil now banded together, working to rebuild what had been lost. The human spirit, proven resilient time and time again, surged forward. It was a long road to recovery, but Earth's people had already begun to show their strength. Dr. Miller and Sarah were not alone in their efforts to help. Around the globe, scientists, engineers, and ordinary citizens began to collaborate, finding ways to restore the damaged atmosphere and stabilize the planet's core. It would take years, perhaps decades, to fix the mess they had made, but humanity was nothing if not determined. As the weeks passed, small signs of recovery emerged. In the ruins of what had once been one of Earth's great cities, a group of survivors managed to restore power to a small section of the grid. In other regions, makeshift farms began to spring up where crops could grow despite the harsh conditions. And all over the world, people were coming together, united by the shared goal of survival and restoration. But there was something else, a new understanding that began to take root in the hearts of humanity. The Galactic Council's fleet had been defeated, but they were not the only threat that the universe held. Earth had proven its strength, but it had also seen just how fragile its place in the galaxy was. There were still dangers lurking in the vastness of space, and they couldn't afford to ignore that fact. Dr. Miller stood on the balcony of the rebuilt command center, looking out over a world that was beginning to heal. The sky was no longer the blood red it had been immediately after the battle. It was still clouded and uncertain, but there was a hint of blue, a small sign of the planet's resilience. "We've paid a heavy price," Dr. Miller said quietly, "but Earth will rise again. We will rebuild, and when we do, we'll be stronger than ever. The galaxy won't forget what happened here." Sarah, standing beside him, nodded. "We've shown them that humanity can't be underestimated, but we've also learned something important. We may have defeated the Galactic Council, but we can't stand alone in the universe. There's more out there. And now, we need to prepare for whatever comes next." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, humanity's determination to rebuild grew. The world was far from perfect, and the scars of the battle would last for generations, but Earth had survived. And as long as there were people willing to fight for it, the planet would always stand strong. In the years to come, Earth would become a symbol of resistance, the story of how humanity had turned the tide against an invading galactic force would be told for centuries. It was a tale of unity, of survival, and of the strength that comes from never giving up. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that day. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And while Earth had paid a heavy price for its victory, it had also gained something priceless: a future. The human race had proven that no matter how great the odds, they would fight, adapt, and rise again. And as the sun began to rise over a healing Earth, one thing was certain: humanity's story was far from over.